Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy dramatic family stories filled with betrayal, heartbreak, and redemption, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support means everything. I remember the exact moment I stopped being my father's son. It wasn't a loud fight or a dramatic confrontation. There were no slammed doors, no shattered glass, no raised voices echoing through the halls of the house where I grew up. Instead, it was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, the kind where the sky hangs low and gray, and the leaves crunch under your feet like broken promises. I was standing in the middle of the family business, our hardware store, the one my grandfather had built with calloused hands and dreams of stability. The place smelled of sawdust, oil, and old wood. It smelled like my childhood. It smelled like rejection. My father, Harold Thorne, sat behind the massive oak desk that had been in our family for 3 generations. He was a broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked hair and hands that had once taught me how to hold a hammer, how to sand a rough edge until it was smooth enough to touch. But those same hands had never once patted me on the back for a job well done. Not once. My older brother, Daniel, lounged in the chair beside him, legs crossed, a smug smile playing on his lips. Daniel had always been the golden child. He was taller, louder, more charming in that slippery way that made people forgive his laziness. He could break something, and my father would call it an accident. I could fix something, and my father would call it expected. I stood on the other side of the desk, my work boots heavy on the worn floorboards. I had just finished a 12-hour shift restocking shelves, cleaning the back room, and dealing with a supplier who had shorted us on an order. Daniel had shown up at noon, drank coffee, and spent an hour on his phone laughing with friends. That was the pattern of our lives. I worked. Daniel supervised. I bled. Daniel profited. "Come in, Nathan." "Close the door," my father said, not looking up from a stack of papers. His voice was gruff, the kind of tone he used when he was about to deliver news he knew I wouldn't like. I closed the door. The click of the latch felt final, though I didn't know why yet. Daniel stretched his arms above his head, yawning theatrically. "This won't take long, little brother. Dad just wants to make things official." I said nothing. I had learned years ago that silence was my only defense. Arguing with my father was like arguing with a brick wall, exhausting and pointless. So I waited. I watched my father shuffle papers, clear his throat, avoid my eyes. The clock on the wall ticked. Each second felt like a small death. Finally, my father pushed a document across the desk toward me. "I'm signing over the business to Daniel," he said, flat and matter-of-fact, as if he were announcing the weather. "Effective immediately. He'll be the sole owner and manager. You'll report to him from now on." The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced off my ears like pebbles against glass. I blinked, waiting for the punchline. There had to be a joke here. I had given 15 years of my life to this store. 15 years. I started sweeping floors when I was 12. I learned inventory management at 14. I worked through high school, through college breaks, through every holiday and weekend. I had turned down better jobs, higher pay, real careers, because my father said he needed me. He said the family business required loyalty. He said one day it would all pay off. And now he was handing it to Daniel. Daniel, who had quit 3 different jobs in 2 years. Daniel, who had borrowed money from my father and never paid it back. Daniel, who once lost the keys to the delivery truck and blamed me for it. "I don't understand," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I've been running this place for the last 5 years. I manage the books, I handle the vendors, I train the staff. Daniel doesn't even know how to use the register." My father's jaw tightened. That was the look that said I had stepped out of line. Daniel is the eldest. The business goes to the eldest son. That's how it's always been in this family. "Grandpa left it to you because you were the only one who wanted it," I said. The words came out sharper than I meant, but I didn't take them back. "Uncle Mark didn't want it. That's why you got it. Not because you were the eldest." My father's face reddened. He hated when I brought up facts that contradicted his version of history. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think because you've put in some hours, you deserve what your brother was born to inherit." Born to inherit. The phrase hit me like a slap. I looked at Daniel, who was smirking, clearly enjoying the show. He shrugged, palms up. "Sorry, Nate. Family rules. I don't make them." "You don't even want this place," I said to Daniel. "You've said 100 times that you hate it here. You call it a dinosaur. You told your friends it's a dead end." Daniel's smirk faltered for a second, but he recovered quickly. People change, little brother. I've decided to step up. Take responsibility. You know, be a man. My father nodded approvingly, as if Daniel had just recited poetry. That's right. Daniel is ready to lead. And you, Nathan, need to learn your place. You've been too big for your britches lately. Questioning my decisions. Undermining your brother. I won't have it. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but my father raised a hand. That hand had once taught me to ride a bike. Now it was silencing me like I was a child caught stealing cookies. If you don't like it, my father said, his eyes cold and hard, walk away. Nobody's forcing you to stay. The room went very quiet. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the desk, watching me like a hawk watching a mouse. My father's gaze never wavered. He meant it. He really meant it. After 15 years of sweat and sacrifice, after all the birthdays I missed, all the nights I worked late while Daniel went to parties, all the times I covered for his mistakes, he was telling me to walk away if I didn't like being demoted to a subordinate in my own life's work. Something inside me broke at that moment. But it didn't break like glass, shattering into sharp shards of anger. It broke like a rope that had been fraying for years, finally snapping under one last ounce of weight. And in that silence, I felt something I had never felt before in that store. Freedom. I looked at my father. I looked at my brother. I looked at the document on the desk, the one that erased me from the future I had built with my own 2 hands. Then I took a breath. A long, slow, deep breath. Okay, I said. My father blinked. Daniel's smirk faltered again. Okay, my father repeated, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. Okay, I said again. I'll walk away. I turned and walked to the door. My hand was steady on the handle. My heart was pounding, but my voice was calm. I had spent years being silent, swallowing my pride, accepting scraps of appreciation while Daniel feasted on praise. I had told myself that my father loved me in his own way. I had told myself that hard work would eventually be recognized. I had told myself that family was worth any sacrifice. But family doesn't ask you to sacrifice your dignity. Family doesn't hand everything to someone who doesn't deserve it and then tell you to leave if you complain. Family doesn't make you feel like a ghost in your own home. Nathan, wait, my father said. There was something in his voice, surprise, maybe, or the first flicker of doubt. Don't be dramatic. We can talk about this. I paused, my hand still on the handle. I didn't turn around. You said walk away if I don't like it. I don't like it. So I'm walking. You'll regret this, Daniel said, his voice losing its smugness and gaining an edge of irritation. You have no idea what it's like out there. You've been coddled here your whole life. I almost laughed. Coddled. I had been coddled like a workhorse is coddled, fed just enough to keep pulling the plow. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, then out the back in trance, into the cold autumn air. The parking lot was empty except for my old truck. The sky was the color of tarnished silver. A wind kicked up, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and distant rain. I walked to my truck, got in, and sat there for a long moment with my hands on the steering wheel. I expected to feel sad. I expected to feel angry. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a vast, hollow numbness that filled my chest like cold water. I started the engine and drove away. I didn't look back. Not once. The first week after I left was strange. I had no plan, no savings to speak of. My father had always paid me just enough to get by, claiming the business was barely breaking even. I knew that wasn't true. I had seen the books. The store was profitable. But my father kept the money tight, reinvesting most of it, and Daniel's spending habits didn't help. So I left with $3,000 in my checking account, a truck that had 150,000 miles on it, and a toolbox full of good quality tools that I had bought with my own money over the years. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town, a cramped one-bedroom above a laundromat. The walls were thin, the carpet smelled musty, and the landlord was a heavy-set man named Mr. Kowalski, who collected rent in cash and asked no questions. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one could take it away from me. No one could tell me I didn't belong there. For the first few days, I did nothing but sleep. I hadn't realized how exhausted I was. The years of overwork, of stress, of constantly trying to prove my worth, it had all caught up with me. I slept 12, 14 hours a day. I ordered cheap takeout and ate it in front of the television, watching shows I didn't care about just to fill the silence. On the fourth day, my phone rang. It was my mother, Elaine. I let it go to voicemail. She called again 5 minutes later. Again, I didn't answer. Then she texted, "Your father told me what happened. Please call me. I'm worried about you." I stared at the message for a long time. My mother was a kind woman, gentle and soft-spoken, but she had never stood up to my father. Not once. When he favored Daniel, she looked the other way. When he belittled me, she changed the subject. She loved me, I knew that. But her love was passive, a quiet current that never rose to the surface. I didn't blame her. She had her own battles, her own fears. But I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was fine. I texted back, "I'm okay. Need some time." She replied almost instantly, "Please don't cut us off. We're family." Family. There was that word again. It felt like a cage sometimes, a word used to excuse behavior that would never be tolerated from strangers. I put my phone down and didn't pick it up again until the next morning. By the second week, the numbness began to fade, replaced by something sharper. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. I started to see my life differently, as if I had been looking at a blurry photograph that suddenly came into focus. My father had never respected me. He had used me. He had kept me close because I was useful, because I did the work Daniel refused to do, because I asked for nothing and accepted everything. And I had let him. I had stayed silent for years, convincing myself that patience was a virtue, that loyalty would be rewarded, that love would eventually be returned in equal measure. But love isn't a transaction, and silence isn't strength. It's surrender. I started looking for work. That's when I realized how much I had sacrificed for the family business. I had no resume to speak of, 15 years at the same small hardware store, with no official title, no promotions, no references I could use without involving my father. I had skills, real skills. I could fix almost anything, from a leaky faucet to a broken engine. I knew inventory systems, customer service, supply chain logistics. But none of that was on paper. None of that came with certifications or degrees or official recognition. I applied to a dozen places. Hardware stores, construction companies, maintenance departments. Most didn't call back. The ones that did asked about the gap in my work history. I had worked at the family business, I explained. "Why did you leave?" They asked. "Family reasons," I said. They nodded, but I could see the suspicion in their eyes. Family reasons. That could mean anything. Drama, instability, unreliability. At night, I lay in bed and replayed the conversation in my father's office. Over and over, I heard his voice, "Walk away if you don't like it." The casual cruelty of it. The way he had dismissed 15 years of my life as if it meant nothing. And the worst part? A small, broken part of me still wanted his approval. Still wanted him to call and apologize, to say he had made a mistake, to beg me to come back. But he didn't call. Neither did Daniel. The only person who reached out was my mother, and her messages grew less frequent as the days passed. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I was better off. Alone. 3 weeks after I left, something happened that I didn't expect. I got a call from an old customer of the hardware store, a contractor named Pete Morrison. Pete was a good man, gruff and honest, with calloused hands and a laugh that filled a room. He had been coming to the store for years, and he always asked for me by name because I knew where everything was, and I never tried to upsell him on things he didn't need. "Nate, heard you're not at the store anymore," Pete said, his voice crackling through the phone. "That true?" "It's true," I said. "What happened?" "You get a better offer." I hesitated. I didn't want to air my family's dirty laundry, but Pete had always been straight with me. Let's just say my father decided to go in a different direction. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, I've been watching you work for years. You're the best damn hardware man in this county. My nephew runs a construction supply company over in Millbrook. They need a warehouse manager. Good pay, benefits, real job. You interested?" I almost said no out of pride. I almost said I didn't need charity. But then I looked around my tiny apartment, at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, at the empty fridge, and I swallowed my pride. "Yeah," I said. "I'm interested." Pete gave me the contact information, and I called his nephew that afternoon. His name was David Morrison, and he ran Morrison Construction Supply, a mid-sized company that supplied materials to job sites across 3 counties. David was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude. He interviewed me over the phone for 20 minutes, asked detailed questions about inventory management, vendor relationships, and team leadership. I answered honestly, drawing on years of experience I had never been paid for. Pete says you're the real deal, David said. I trust Pete. When can you start? Tomorrow, I said. Show up at 7. We'll get you set up. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed, trembling. Not from fear, from relief. For the first time in my life, someone was giving me a chance based on my abilities, not my last name. Someone saw value in me that wasn't tied to my father's approval or Daniel's shadow. I cried a little, sitting there in the fading afternoon light. I didn't try to stop the tears. They felt like something being washed out of me. The job at Morrison Construction Supply was everything I had hoped for and more. The warehouse was a massive building on the edge of Millbrook, filled with towering shelves of lumber, drywall, piping, and hardware. My job was to manage the inventory, coordinate shipments, and supervise a team of 8 warehouse workers. It was hard work, physical work, the kind that left you tired and satisfied at the end of the day. David turned out to be a fair and demanding boss. He didn't care about family connections or who your father was. He cared about results. And I delivered. Within my first 2 weeks, I identified inefficiencies in the inventory system that had been costing the company thousands of dollars each month. I reorganized the warehouse layout, streamlined the receiving process, and implemented a new tracking system that reduced errors by nearly 40%. David noticed. He pulled me aside after my 3rd week and said, "You're doing good work, Nate. Better than I expected if I'm being honest. Where'd you learn all this?" "Family business," I said, the words tasting bitter and sweet at the same time. David nodded. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't need to. He could see the answer in the way I worked, carefully, thoroughly, with an almost obsessive attention to detail. That was the legacy my father had given me, whether he intended to or not. A work ethic that would not quit. A determination to prove myself, over and over, to anyone who would watch. But even as I built a new life, the old one kept calling to me. Not in phone calls. Those had stopped entirely after my mother's last message, which simply said, "I love you." No calls from my father. No calls from Daniel. Nothing. It was as if I had been erased from the family, wiped clean like a name from a whiteboard. That silence hurt more than any argument could have, because it confirmed what I had always feared but never wanted to admit. I was replaceable. Daniel was the son my father wanted. I was just the son he needed, until he didn't. For weeks after I left, I was in the warehouse office, reviewing the weekly inventory report, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. My father's name. My heart did something strange, a lurch, a skip, a painful twist. I stared at the name for a long time, watching it glow on the screen. Harold Thorne. I thought about ignoring it. I thought about letting it go to voicemail like I had with my mother's calls. But something made me answer. Maybe it was the lingering hope that he had finally realized his mistake. Maybe it was the need to hear his voice, even if it hurt. Maybe it was just curiosity. "Hello," I said. "Nathan." My father's voice was different. Cracked. Broken. Not the gruff, commanding tone I had heard my whole life. This was a voice I had never heard before. A voice that had been crying. "Dad? What's wrong?" There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, uneven and shaky. When he spoke again, his words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other like water over a dam. "It's gone, Nathan. Everything is gone. The business. The store. Your brother. He let it all burn." I didn't understand at first. Burn? What did he mean, burn? A fire? An accident? I asked him to slow down, to explain, but he couldn't stop talking, as if the words were a flood he had been holding back for weeks. "He took over like you said he would. First week, he fired the night manager, old Jerry, the one who's been with us for 20 years. Said he needed to cut costs. Then he stopped paying the suppliers, said he could negotiate better deals. But he never negotiated anything. He just ignored them. The bills piled up. The inventory started running low. Customers complained. My father's voice cracked again, and I heard him sob. The sound was so foreign, so wrong, that I almost hung up. This was not the man who had raised me. This was not the man who had looked me in the eye and told me to walk away. This was someone else entirely, someone small and scared and drowning in regret. I tried to warn him, my father continued. I told him he was moving too fast, making too many changes. But he said I was old-fashioned, that I didn't understand modern business. He took out a loan, a big one, without telling me. Used the store as collateral. And then he He invested it in some online scheme. Some cryptocurrency thing that his friends told him about. I closed my eyes. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in my bones, the weight of disaster pressing down like a physical force. He lost it all, Nathan. Every penny. The loan, the supplier's money, everything. And then the bank came calling. They wanted their payments, but there was nothing left. Daniel stopped showing up at the store. Just disappeared. Left the doors unlocked, the lights on, the register open. By the time I found out, it was too late. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings. The suppliers had put liens on everything. The store is being auctioned off next month. I sat there in the warehouse office, the inventory report forgotten, the buzz of fluorescent lights humming overhead. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt vindication. You made your choice, I wanted to say. You picked Daniel. You told me to walk away. This is what you get. But I didn't feel any of those things. I felt a hollow, aching sadness. Not for my father. Not for Daniel. For the store itself. For the building my grandfather had built with his own hands. The shelves he had hammered together. The floorboards he had sanded smooth. For the history that was being erased, not by accident or time, but by arrogance and neglect. I'm sorry, Nathan, my father whispered. I'm so sorry. You were right. You were right about everything. And I was too blind to see it. The words I had waited years to hear. Apology. Admission. Acknowledgement. And yet they felt like ash in my ears. Because they came too late. Because the damage was already done. Because sorry doesn't rebuild a life. Sorry doesn't give you back 15 years of your youth spent serving someone else's dream. What do you want me to do, Dad? I asked, my voice flat. I don't know, he said. I needed to tell you. I needed you to know that you were right. And I needed to hear your voice. There it was. The truth, raw and bleeding. He hadn't called to ask for money or help or forgiveness. He had called because he was lonely and scared, and he had burnt every other bridge. I was the last person left who might listen. Not because he loved me best. Because I had always been the one who stayed, the one who cleaned up the messes, the one who never said no. Where's Daniel now? I asked. I don't know. He won't answer my calls. His girlfriend says he left town. Went to stay with friends somewhere. I don't even know if he's alive. I wanted to say I told you so. I wanted to scream it. But what would that accomplish? What would that heal? My father was a broken man sitting alone in a house that was probably about to be lost too, for all I knew. And my brother was a coward who had run away rather than face the consequences of his own greed. What about Mom? I asked. She's not well. This has hit her hard. She's barely eating, barely talking. The doctor gave her something for the anxiety, but I felt a pang of guilt. I had been so focused on my own pain, my own anger, that I hadn't thought enough about my mother. She was collateral damage in this war between my father and me, a bystander caught in the crossfire. She had never chosen sides because she couldn't. She had just tried to hold the family together, even as it fell apart around her. I'll come see her, I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Not today. I have work. But this weekend. I'll come by. My father's breath caught. You will. For Mom. Not for you. Not for Daniel. For her. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you. I hung up before he could say anything else. I sat in the chair for a long time, staring at the wall. The inventory report was still on the screen, columns of numbers that no longer mattered. My reflection was faint in the monitor, a ghost superimposed over spreadsheets and deadlines. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and thought about the store. I thought about the smell of sawdust and oil. I thought about my grandfather, a man I barely remembered, but whose presence I had always felt in those walls. He had been a quiet man, my grandfather, a man of few words and many actions. He had built the business from nothing, starting with a small cart of tools he pushed through the streets, eventually saving enough to rent a storefront, then buy it, then expand it. He had given my father a legacy, and my father had given it to Daniel, and Daniel had burned it to the ground. What kind of family does that? What kind of father chooses the son who destroys over the son who builds? I had no answers. Only questions that circled like vultures in the dark. The weekend came faster than I expected. I drove to my parents' house on Saturday morning, a gray drizzle falling from a low sky. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint faded, the gutters sagging. The lawn, once my mother's pride, was overgrown with weeds. It looked like a house that had given up. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes before getting out. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty. I had imagined this moment so many times, returning as a success, rubbing my father's nose in my achievements, showing him what he had thrown away. But now that I was here, all I felt was tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked older than I remembered, her face lined with worry, her eyes red-rimmed. She had always been a pretty woman, soft and warm, but now she seemed diminished, like a photograph left too long in the sun. "Nathan," she whispered, and then she was crying, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and tears. "Oh, my boy, my sweet boy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." I held her. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. I didn't say don't worry, because I was worried. I just held her and let her cry, feeling her thin shoulders shake against my chest. My father was in the living room. He sat in his recliner, the same recliner he had sat in every night for as long as I could remember. But he looked different, smaller, somehow, as if he had shrunk inside his own skin. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes hollow. There was a glass of whiskey on the table beside him, half empty. "Nathan," he said, his voice rough. He tried to stand, but his legs seemed unsteady, and he sank back down. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I sat on the couch across from him, my mother settling beside me, her hand finding mine and holding tight. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the soft patter of rain against the windows. "I don't know where to start," my father said. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from childhood, a sign of stress, of uncertainty. "I've made so many mistakes. So many. And I don't know if I can ever make them right." "You can't," I said. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't soften them. "You can't make them right. 15 years, Dad. 15 years I gave to that store. And you handed it to Daniel like I was nothing. Like I was just some employee you could fire." My father flinched. My mother squeezed my hand, but she didn't tell me to stop. For once, she was silent. For once, she let the truth hang in the air like smoke. "I know," my father said. "I know what I did. And I know why I did it. Not that it excuses anything. But maybe if you understand, you can forgive me. Someday." "Why?" I asked. It was the question I had wanted to ask for years, the question that had festered in my chest like a splinter. Why him? Why always him? What did I do wrong? My father closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "You didn't do anything wrong, Nathan. That's the worst part. You did everything right. You worked hard. You were loyal. You never complained. And Daniel was a mess from the start. He struggled in school. He got into trouble. He couldn't hold a job. I thought if I gave him the business, it would finally make him responsible. It would force him to grow up. I thought I was saving him." "You sacrificed me to save him," I said. The words were cold, flat, final. My father didn't deny it. He bowed his head, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. I had never seen my father cry. Not at funerals, not during arguments, not ever. He was the kind of man who believed that tears were weakness, that emotions were to be suppressed, that a man's job was to provide and protect and never, ever show vulnerability. And now he was crying in front of me, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt uncomfortable, like I was watching something private, something I wasn't supposed to witness. "Dad," I said softer this time. "Stop. Just stop." He looked up, his face blotchy and wet. "I can't stop. I can't stop thinking about what I did to you. How many times I pushed you aside. How many times I chose him over you. And now he's gone, and you're here, and I don't deserve to have you here. I don't deserve anything." That was the moment I could have walked away. I could have stood up, said you're right, you don't deserve anything, and walked out the door. I could have cut them both out of my life forever, moved to a new city, changed my name, started fresh. No one would have blamed me. Everyone would have understood. But I didn't walk away. Because despite everything, despite the years of favoritism and neglect and silent suffering, these were still my parents. This was still my family. And family, for all its flaws and failures, is the only one you get. "I'm not here for you," I said, echoing what I had told him on the phone. "I'm here for Mom. And I'm here because I don't want to be like you. I don't want to walk away from people who need me, even if they don't deserve my help." My mother gasped softly, but she didn't argue. My father nodded slowly, accepting the rebuke like bitter medicine. "What happens now?" I asked. What's left? My father wiped his face with the back of his hand. The house is still ours. For now. I took out a second mortgage years ago to pay off some of Daniel's debts. That loan is almost due. If I can't pay it, the bank will take the house too. What about the store? Is there any way to stop the auction? My father shook his head. Too late. The bank has already started the process. The auction is in 3 weeks. After that, the store belongs to whoever buys it. I thought about the store. I thought about the oak desk, the creaky floorboards, the smell of sawdust and oil. I thought about all the hours I had spent there, all the sweat and hope I had poured into those walls. And I felt something stir in my chest. Not anger, not sadness, but something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. How much is the debt? I asked. My father looked at me, confused. What? The debt. The loan Daniel took out. The back taxes. All of it. How much do you owe? My father hesitated. I don't see how that. How much, Dad? He named a number. It was large, larger than I expected, but not impossible. Not if someone was smart and careful and willing to work. Not if someone had a good job, good credit, and a plan. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, filed the number away in my mind, and changed the subject. We talked for another hour, about my mother's health, about the neighbors, about small, safe things that didn't cut so deep. When I left, I hugged my mother tightly and shook my father's hand. His grip was weak, uncertain, nothing like the iron handshake I remembered from childhood. On the drive back to my apartment, I thought about David Morrison. I thought about the warehouse, the inventory system, the raise he had hinted at last week. I thought about the small savings I had started to build, the extra shifts I had taken, the freelance handyman work I did on weekends. And I thought about the store. My grandfather's store. The store that should have been mine. The next morning, I went to see David before my shift started. I knocked on his office door, and he looked up from his computer, surprised to see me so early. Nate? Everything okay? I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to be straight with me. David leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Shoot. How much do you think this warehouse is worth? The business, the inventory, the contracts, all of it. How much would someone need to buy a company like this? David raised an eyebrow. That's a big question for a Monday morning. You thinking of becoming an entrepreneur? Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm just trying to understand something. David studied me for a long moment. He was a sharp man, perceptive. I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, connecting pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed. You're thinking about buying your family's store, aren't you? I didn't deny it. It's going to auction in 3 weeks. The bank is selling it to cover the debts. If I could get the money together. That's a lot of money, Nate. More than you've got saved up, I'm guessing. I know. And even if you buy the building, the business is gone. The inventory, the goodwill, the customer base. Daniel burned through all of it. You'd be buying an empty shell. I know that too. David was quiet. Then he smiled. A small, rueful smile. You're a stubborn son of a gun. You know that? I've been told. He laughed, a short bark of amusement. All right. Here's what I can do. The company is looking to expand into a second location. We've been scouting properties for months, but nothing has felt right. If you buy that store, and if you're willing to partner with us, Morrison Construction Supply would be interested in leasing the space from you. Long-term contract. Good terms. Enough to cover the mortgage, and then some. I blinked. I hadn't expected that. You do that. I do it because you're good at your job, Nate. And because I think you're the kind of person who deserves a second chance. Lord knows I've had a few myself. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, and I had to look away for a moment to compose myself. David didn't push. He just sat there, patient, waiting. Thank you. I finally managed. I don't thank you. Don't thank me yet. You still have to win the auction. And you still have to convince the bank you're a serious bidder. That's going to take money. Real money. Not just promises. I'll figure it out, I said. And I meant it. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. I worked double shifts at the warehouse, then came home and worked on my plan. I called every bank in the county, asking about small business loans. Most turned me down. I had no collateral, no business history, no track record as an owner. But one bank, a small credit union in Millbrook, agreed to meet with me. The loan officer was a woman named Sandra Chun, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. She listened to my pitch. Buy the store, lease it to Morrison Construction Supply. Use the lease income to pay back the loan. She asked detailed questions about David's company, about the real estate market, about my personal finances. And then she asked the question I had been dreading. Why should we take a chance on you, Mr. Thorne? You have no experience as a business owner. Your credit is average at best. And the property you want to buy is being sold under foreclosure, which means it's probably in poor condition. I took a breath. Because I know that building better than anyone alive. I grew up in it. I worked in it for 15 years. I know where every pipe runs, every beam sits, every floorboard creaks. And because I'm not doing this for myself, I'm doing it for my grandfather, who built it with his own hands. I'm doing it because my father made a mistake, and I don't want that mistake to be the last word on our family's legacy. Sandra studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I'll take your application to the loan committee. I can't promise anything, but I'll do what I can. 2 days later, she called back. The credit union had approved a loan, not for the full amount, but for enough to make a serious bid at auction. I would need to cover the rest myself, using my savings and whatever I could borrow from friends. I didn't have friends with that kind of money, but I had something else. I had a work ethic, a reputation, and a former customer who believed in me. I called Pete Morrison, the contractor who had first told me about the job at his nephew's company. I explained what I was trying to do and asked if he would be willing to invest. Pete was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Nate, I've known you for 10 years. I've watched you bust your tail for a father who didn't appreciate you. I've watched you keep your mouth shut and do the right thing, even when it cost you. I'll give you the money, not as an investment, as a loan, interest-free. Pay me back when you can. I tried to thank him, but my voice broke. Pete just said, don't mention it. Just win that auction. The morning of the auction, I woke up before dawn. I put on my best suit, the one I had worn to my grandfather's funeral, the one my mother had bought me for college graduation. It was too tight in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves, but it was the best I had. I drove to the county courthouse, where the auction was being held. The parking lot was already half full. I saw lawyers in expensive suits, real estate investors with cold eyes, and a few ordinary people like me, hoping to catch a bargain. My father was there. He stood near the back of the room, hunched and gray, looking like a ghost at his own wake. My mother wasn't with him. She was too unwell to come, he told me when I approached. We stood in awkward silence, two strangers bound by blood and failure. I didn't think you'd come, my father said. I almost didn't, I admitted. Are you going to bid? I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and hold a hammer and keep my mouth shut. The man who had chosen my brother over me, who had told me to walk away, who had called me crying when his world fell apart. Yes, I said. I'm going to bid. My father's eyes widened. Nathan, you can't. That place is a money pit. The bank's appraisal was a fraction of what it used to be worth. You'll lose everything. I've already lost everything, I said. The only thing left is to decide what I build next. The auctioneer took the podium at 10 o'clock sharp. He was a barrel-chested man with a voice that carried like a foghorn. He read the legal description of the property, the store, the parking lot, the small warehouse behind it. He announced the opening bid. I raised my paddle. The bidding started slowly. A few investors tossed out low numbers, testing the waters. The auctioneer worked the crowd, drawing out higher bids with practiced skill. The price climbed. I kept bidding. Every time the bidding stalled, I raised my paddle again. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms slick with sweat. I could feel my father's eyes on me, burning with fear and hope and something else, something that might have been pride. The bidding narrowed to me and one other person, a sharp-faced woman in a designer suit who represented an out-of-state investment group. She bid without emotion, as if she were buying a used car instead of a building that held 3 generations of my family's history. The price went higher, higher than I had planned, higher than my loan and my savings and Pete's money could cover. I hesitated. My paddle hovered in the air. Going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. I thought about my grandfather, pushing his cart through the streets, dreaming of a store. I thought about my father, young and hopeful, taking over the business and growing it into something stable. I thought about the years I had spent there, the sweat and the tears and the silent sacrifices. I thought about Daniel, who had thrown it all away because he never understood what it meant to earn something. And I thought about myself, about the man I wanted to be, not a man who walked away when things got hard, not a man who let his family's legacy be erased by greed and neglect, a man who fought, a man who built, A man who stayed. I raised my paddle one last time, bidding more than I had, more than I could afford, more than I should have. The auctioneer's gavel fell. Sold to bidder number 47. I had won. The room erupted in murmurs. The sharp-faced woman scowled and gathered her things. My father stared at me, his mouth open, tears streaming down his face. I didn't look at him. I looked at the auctioneer, who was already waving me forward to sign the paperwork. It took an hour to finish the transaction. I signed my name a dozen times, initialed a dozen clauses, handed over a cashier's check that represented everything I had and everything I owed. When it was done, I walked out of the courthouse into the cold autumn sun. My father was waiting for me on the steps. He looked small and old, his shoulders hunched, his hands trembling. "Nathan," he said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "I didn't do this for you." "I know, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for how I treated you. For the favoritism. For the blindness. For telling you to walk away. You were the one who should have stayed. You were always the one." I looked at him for a long time. The anger was still there, buried deep but not gone. The hurt was still there, a scar that would never fully heal. But there was something else too. Something that felt like the beginning of forgiveness. "Thank you," I said. "That means something. Not everything, but something." My father nodded, accepting the partial absolution. "What happens now? To the store? To you?" "I rebuild," I said. "I have a plan. A good one. But it's going to take time. And work. A lot of work. Will you let me help?" The question caught me off guard. My father had never asked to help me with anything. He had always told me what to do, always directed, always commanded. But this was different. This was an offer. A request. A plea. "I'll think about it," I said. And that was enough for now. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I worked at Morrison Construction Supply during the day, then drove to the old store in the evenings and on weekends. The place was in worse shape than I had feared. Daniel had left it abandoned for weeks before the bank took over. The pipes had frozen and burst, flooding the back rooms. Mold had started growing on the walls. Vandals had broken in and stolen whatever they could carry, tools, fixtures, even the copper wiring. I stood in the middle of the store, surrounded by ruin, and I wanted to cry. Everything my grandfather had built, everything my father had maintained, everything I had sacrificed, it was all lying in pieces around me. The oak desk was gone, probably sold for scrap. The shelves were empty, coated in dust and grime. The floorboards were warped and rotting. But I didn't cry. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I started by cleaning. I threw out trash, swept floors, scrubbed walls. I ripped out the water-damaged drywall and hauled it to the dumpster. I tore up the ruined floorboards, saving what I could, and exposed the concrete slab beneath. I worked alone, night after night, until my hands were blistered and my back screamed with pain. After 2 weeks, my father showed up. He stood in the doorway, watching me work, wearing old work clothes that I hadn't seen him in for years. "I brought coffee," he said, holding up a thermos. I stopped hammering and wiped the sweat from my forehead. "You don't have to be here." "I know," he said, "but I want to be." I let him stay. We worked side by side that evening, hammering and hauling and cleaning. We didn't talk much. The silence between us was different now, not the heavy, angry silence of the past, but something lighter, something that felt like healing. Over the following weeks, more people came. Pete Morrison showed up with a crew of his workers and helped repair the plumbing. David Morrison sent over a truckload of building materials at cost. Old Jerry, the night manager my father had fired, came by with his tool belt and worked for free, refusing any payment. "This store was good to me for 20 years, Jerry said. "I ain't gonna let it die without a fight." Even my mother came, though she couldn't do much physical work. She brought sandwiches and lemonade, sat in a folding chair, and watched us rebuild. Sometimes she cried, looking at the wreckage of the place where she had spent so many years. But she also smiled, more than I had seen her smile in a long time. The store transformed slowly. The walls went up, fresh and clean. The new floorboards gleamed under the lights. The shelves, salvaged from the back warehouse, were sanded and stained and filled with new inventory. David's company had helped me negotiate deals with suppliers, leveraging their relationships to get me good prices on everything from nails to power tools. 3 months after the auction, the store was ready. Not the same as it had been. That was impossible. But something new. Something built on the foundation of the old, but stronger, better, more resilient. I stood at the front door on opening day, looking at the sign I had painted myself, Thorn Hardware and Supply. Simple, honest, a name that had been tarnished but not broken. My father stood beside me. His arm brushed mine, and I didn't pull away. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You actually did it." "We did it," I said. "Not alone. A lot of people helped." The doors opened at 9 o'clock. Customers came, old customers who remembered me from before, new customers drawn by the grand opening sale. Pete Morrison was first in line, buying a new hammer even though he had a dozen at home. David came with his wife and kids, shaking my hand and wishing me luck. Even Sandra Chun, the loan officer from the credit union, showed up to see what her bank's money had built. By the end of the day, I was exhausted but happy. I sat on the loading dock behind the store, watching the sun set, drinking a bottle of water. My father sat beside me, silent. "Daniel called today," he said after a long pause. I tensed. What did he want? He heard about the store, about what you did. He said he was sorry for everything, and he asked if he could come home. I stared at the horizon, where the sky was bleeding orange and pink. The name Daniel still tasted bitter in my mouth. The brother who had stolen my birthright. The brother who had burned everything to the ground. The brother who had run away when things got hard. "What did you tell him?" I asked. I told him it wasn't my decision. "Not anymore. This is your store. Your family now. You get to decide." I turned to look at my father. His face was open, vulnerable, waiting. For the first time in my life, he was giving me a choice. Not demanding, not commanding, just asking. I thought about Daniel, the golden child, the favorite, the one who had been given everything and had squandered it all. I thought about the years of silence, of swallowing my pride, of accepting scraps. I thought about the phone call from my father, crying, saying Daniel had let it all burn. And I thought about forgiveness. Not because Daniel deserved it. Not because my father deserved it. But because I deserved it. I deserved to let go of the anger that had weighed me down for so long. I deserved to stop being the victim of someone else's choices. "Tell him he can come back," I said slowly. "But on my terms. He works. He contributes. He earns his place. No more handouts. No more favors. He proves himself, the way I should have been asked to prove myself from the beginning." My father nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I'll tell him." "And Dad?" "Yes. If he messes up again, if he does anything to hurt this store, this family, ever again, he's out. For good. No second chances. No more walking away and coming back." "I understand." We sat in silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and blue. The air was cold now, the kind of cold that bit through jackets and made you appreciate warmth. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the years of silence, the moment of walking away, the weeks of rebuilding. It had been hard, harder than anything I had ever done, but I had done it. I had taken the ashes of my family's legacy and built something new. Not perfect, not the same, but mine. Daniel came back a week later. He showed up at the store while I was stocking shelves, looking thinner and older than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a hesitance in his step that had never been there before. The smug smile was gone. The swagger was gone. In their place was something that looked like humility, or maybe just exhaustion. "Nate," he said, standing in the aisle, twisting his hands together. "I don't know what to say." "Try the truth," I said, not stopping my work. He swallowed hard. I messed up. I messed up bad. I thought I knew everything, and I didn't know anything. I thought I could just take over and everything would work out because I was the oldest. Because Dad always said I was special. But I'm not special. I'm just a guy who got handed something he didn't earn and then threw it away. I set down the box of nails I was holding and turned to face him. "Why are you here, Daniel?" "Because I don't have anywhere else to go," he admitted, his voice cracking. "And because I want to make things right. I know I can't undo what I did. I know I can't give you back the years you lost. But I can work. I can help. I can try to be the brother I should have been all along." I looked at him. Really looked. This was the brother who had tormented me as a child, who had taken my toys and broken them, who had laughed when I was punished for his mistakes. This was the brother who had stood in our father's office, smirking, while I was told to walk away. This was the brother who had burned our family's legacy to ash. And yet, he was still my brother. Flawed and broken and human, just like me. You start tomorrow, I said. 6 in the morning. You clean the bathrooms, you sweep the floors, you do whatever Jerry tells you to do. You don't get a title. You don't get a key. You don't get paid until I decide you've earned it. And if you so much as look at the register the wrong way, you're gone. Do you understand? Daniel nodded, tears streaming down his face. I understand. Good. Now get out of here. I have work to do. He left, and I went back to stocking shelves. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. I wasn't happy, exactly, but I wasn't angry either. I was something new. Something I had never been before. I was free. A year later, the store was thriving. Morrison Construction Supply had moved into the warehouse space behind the main building, and the lease income was more than enough to cover the loan payments. I had hired a small staff, Jerry as the manager, a few local kids as cashiers and stockers. Daniel worked the floor, and to my surprise, he was actually good at it. He had a way with customers, a charm that had once been used for manipulation but was now channeled into genuine service. He wasn't perfect. He still made mistakes, still needed supervision, still had moments of laziness, but he was trying. And that was more than I had ever expected. My father came to the store every day. He didn't work anymore. His health was failing, his hands too shaky to hold a hammer, but he sat in the back office, drinking coffee and talking to customers. He had become something like the store's mascot, a living link to the past. People liked him. They liked hearing stories about the old days, about my grandfather's cart and the early years of the business. My mother had recovered some of her old spark. She came by with sandwiches and cookies, fussing over the staff like they were her own children. She had forgiven my father, or at least made peace with him. And she had forgiven Daniel too, though she never forgot. As for me, I had changed. The silent boy who had swallowed his pride for years was gone. In his place was a man who spoke his mind, who set boundaries, who refused to be taken for granted. I still loved my family, but I loved myself too. And that made all the difference. One evening, after the store had closed and the staff had gone home, I sat in the back office with my father. The old oak desk had been replaced. This one was new, built by a local carpenter, but it had the same feel, the same weight, the same history. I'm proud of you, Nathan, my father said, his voice soft. I don't say it enough, but I am. I looked at him. His hair was white now, his face lined with years and regrets. He was dying, I knew. Not today or tomorrow, but soon. The doctors had said his heart was weak, his lungs damaged from years of neglect. He had maybe a year, maybe less. Thank you, Dad, I said. I wasted so much time, he continued, staring out the window at the darkening sky. So much time being blind, being stubborn, being afraid. I was afraid that if I admitted you were better than Daniel, it would mean I had failed as a father. But I did fail. Not because you were better, because I treated you like you were less. You did, I agreed. There was no point in pretending otherwise. But you rose above it, he said, turning to look at me. You didn't let my failures define you. You walked away, and then you came back, and you built something beautiful out of the ashes. That takes strength. More strength than I ever had. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just sat there, letting his words settle over me like a blanket. Warm, heavy, a little uncomfortable, but in a good way. I love you, son, my father said. I always did. Even when I didn't show it. Even when I showed it to the wrong person. I love you. I love you too, Dad, I said. And meant it. He passed away 3 months later, in his sleep, in the recliner where he had spent so many evenings. My mother found him in the morning, his coffee cup still half full on the side table. He looked peaceful, she said, like he had finally found rest. The funeral was small, family, close friends, a few old customers from the store. I gave the eulogy, standing at the podium with my hands trembling, my voice cracking. I talked about my father's strengths, his work ethic, his loyalty, his love for his family, flawed as it was. I talked about his mistakes too, because pretending they didn't exist would have been a disservice to the truth. And I talked about forgiveness, about how we had found it, at the end, in the quiet moments between hammer blows and coffee cups. After the funeral, Daniel and I stood by the grave, watching the dirt being shoveled over the casket. The sky was gray, the wind cold, the trees bare. He loved you, you know, Daniel said. At the end, he talked about you all the time. How proud he was. How much he wished he had done things differently. I know, I said. I'm sorry, Nate. For everything. For being the favorite. For taking what should have been yours. For burning it all down. I turned to look at my brother. He was crying, his face blotchy and wet, his shoulders shaking. The golden child, humbled at last. "I forgive you," I said. And I meant that too. We stood there for a long time, two brothers who had been enemies and were now something else. Something that might, with time and effort, become friends. The store continued to grow. By the second year, we had expanded into the building next door, adding a garden center and a paint department. By the third year, we were profitable enough that I was able to pay back Pete Morrison's loan, with interest, despite his protests. By the fifth year, Thorne Hardware and Supply was the largest independent hardware store in the county, employing 30 people and serving thousands of customers. I never married. There were relationships, here and there, but none that stuck. The store was my partner, my child, my legacy. I poured everything into it, and it gave back in ways I had never imagined. Not just money, though there was that, but purpose, meaning, a reason to get up in the morning. Daniel stayed. He worked his way up from bathroom cleaner to floor manager, earning every promotion through sweat and determination. He never asked for special treatment again, and I never gave it. We became partners in the truest sense, not equal partners, because I owned the business and he worked for me, but partners in the work of rebuilding our family. My mother lived another 10 years, long enough to see her grandchildren, Daniel's children, two rambunctious boys who loved the store as much as I had as a child. She doted on them, spoiled them, called them her little treasures. And she made me promise, on her deathbed, that I would never let the store die. "It's not just a building," she whispered, her hand cold in mine. "It's your grandfather's dream, your father's redemption, your legacy. Don't let anyone take it from you." "No one will," I promised. "Not ever again." I kept that promise. Through economic downturns and supply chain crises and a global pandemic that threatened to shut us down, I kept the doors open. I adapted, I innovated, I fought. Because that's what you do when you've already lost everything once. You don't let it happen again. Looking back now, from the vantage point of middle age, I can see the arc of my life more clearly. The years of silence, swallowing my pride, believing that patience would be rewarded. The day I finally walked away, taking nothing but my dignity. The phone call that changed everything, my father's voice cracking as he told me my brother had let it all burn. The auction, the rebuilding, the slow and painful process of forgiveness. I could have stayed silent forever. I could have kept my head down, accepted the scraps, let Daniel run the business into the ground while I swept the floors, and said nothing. But I didn't. I walked away. And in walking away, I found myself. Not everyone will understand that choice. Some will say I should have stayed and fought harder. Some will say I should have cut my family off completely. Some will say I was a fool to buy the store, a fool to forgive my father, a fool to give Daniel a second chance. But they didn't live my life. They didn't carry my burdens. They didn't feel the weight of my father's silence or the sting of his favoritism. They weren't there when I stood in that office, hearing him say, "Walk away if you don't like it." They didn't feel the cold autumn air on their face as they walked out the door, not knowing if they would ever come back. This is my story, not a tale of perfect justice or tidy redemption. It's messy and painful and complicated, just like family, just like life. But it's mine, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. So if you're out there, living in the shadow of someone else's favoritism, swallowing your pride, waiting for a recognition that may never come, hear me. Walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you can do. Sometimes you have to let it all burn before you can build something new. And when the phone rings, and the person who wronged you is crying on the other end, you get to decide what happens next. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of choice. The choice to forgive or not. The choice to help or not. The choice to rebuild or not. That's the real legacy. Not the store, or the money, or the name. The choice. The freedom to decide who you want to be, separate from the family that raised you, separate from the expectations that bound you. I chose to rebuild. I chose to forgive. And in doing so, I found something I had been searching for my whole life. Myself. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share if you want to hear more tales of family, betrayal, and redemption. Your support helps this channel grow, and it means the world to me. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away.